Hello and welcome to another Hollywood Wargaming unit review for Bolt Action. And today we're doing a special top 5 list, and this is going to be for the SdKfz for the German faction. Now, we already did a top 10 Panzers for the German faction in a previous video, and today we're going to loop back and look at some support vehicles that they have access to. As we saw with the British and US faction review videos, vehicles were lumped in with the tanks in the top 10, but the Germans have enough vehicle variety where we could kind of double back and look at some of their lighter and support vehicles in its own video. And that's exactly what we're doing here today with this top 5 SdKfz or SdKfz unit review video. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the naming conventions of the German army, the SdKfz designation is a sort of acronym version for the German term meaning special purpose vehicle. And I'm not positive on this fact, but I have a hunch that this vague naming mechanic kind of played in with the Treaty of Versailles and how the Germany very stealthily rearmed their military during the interwar period. As we know, the first Panzers were purchased and developed under the term of Leichttraktor and Großtraktor, meaning light and heavy tractor, when they were actually training military crews to operate tanks on the battlefield. And while most armored tanks would later shake their SdKfz designations and become known as Panzerkampfwagens and get the PZK-PFW naming convention, a lot of armored support vehicles, half-tracks, troop transports, and reconnaissance cars would maintain their SdKfz designations. So while Panzers such as the Tiger I may have received SdKfz designations, we're going to use the term SdKfz to refer to light armored vehicles here. And as mentioned in my German faction review, I think the Germans have some great options in list building when it comes to armored cars and other support vehicles. So I'm very excited to get right into this, and at number 5, we have the Opel Blitz sporting the Flak 38. And at 50 points when taken as a regular, you're going to get a soft-skinned wheeled vehicles with a light autocannon mounted on the back with a 360-degree arc of fire. Now this is going to count as an open-topped vehicle, and overall this is going to be a rudimentary supplement to the basic Flak 38 as it would show up in the artillery slot of your platoon. However, rather than having 3 men behind a gun shield, it is going to just be a soft-skinned vehicle. And while that's not necessarily going to make you tougher as a target, it is going to incorporate a lot of mobility in with this unit and entirely negate the need for a tow. And at 50 points, this unit is the exact same as it would be in the artillery category. And I think it is a fantastic trade-off. Stationary artillery units such as the Flak 38 are prime targets for mortars, as they know they're going to get their points investment returned and not have to worry about the target running away to shake their fire. And if they do re-hitch to a tow to move, that's a pretty large chunk of points that the enemy is no longer putting to good use. So being able to take an artillery piece on a vehicle of any type, even if it's soft skin, is an overall fantastic upgrade to that unit, especially if you're not paying a single point more to do it. However, it's worth noting that soft skin vehicles are not very durable and can succumb to small arms firepower. So if you do decide to run this unit bare bones as a soft-skin vehicle sporting that autocannon, I would recommend taking advantage of that long range the light autocannon has and chipping away at your enemies from a distance. Allow other units to play aggressively and distract the enemy while this one plays more of a support role. It will be very quickly destroyed if it takes point and leads any assaults, or gets too close to the enemy in general. To use this vehicle effectively, you really need to take advantage of that 48-inch range. Keep in mind the autocannon has that 1-inch HE profile and 2 shots, so don't be too concerned about that -1 to hit for long range. Just remain stationary when able, relocate when you have to, but ideally try and maintain that 4+ to hit at long range, and this vehicle should have no trouble making its 50 points back. And while I think this vehicle's stock build is very affordable and very viable, there are some upgrade options we will also take a look at. The first of which is to add an armored cab to this vehicle, upping its armor value from soft-skinned up to a legitimate armored fighting vehicle with a defensive value of 7. Now, this is a tremendous leap in durability for this vehicle. However, it will remain open-topped, which means you will no longer receive damage from incoming small arms fire, but you will still receive pin markers. You will also succumb to infantry assaults. But if you're playing this truck right, neither of those things should be too big of an issue. So if you're running this vehicle with not too many other vehicles or large targets in your list, it might be a good idea to take this upgrade on it to give it a little more durability. However, that is going to take this vehicle up to 80 points at regular veterancy, which is a 60% increase, and something that should be thought about when you're considering the fact that this is more or less just a platform for a light autocannon. But after that, we also have the option to add a Flak version of the Flak 38 onto this vehicle. And as we all know, the Flak is that lethal quad light autocannon weapon, as seen on the Wirbelwind. And that is going to be a whopping 90 point upgrade, but you are definitely upping the lethality of this vehicle. However, at that level, your vehicle is going to be much more of a target, and I can guarantee you that you are going to need to take the armored cab if you want to take the Flak on top of this Opel. And at 170 points, that's going to turn the Opel Blitz with the Flak autocannon into a sort of budget Wirbelwind. And if you watch my top 10 Panzer review, that should leap out at you, because one of my biggest problems with the Wirbelwind was its expensive price tag of 240 points. However, for those 70 extra points that the Wirbelwind does cost, you are getting an extra hull-mounted medium machine gun, which does benefit from the buzzsaw keyword, and 2 more on your armor value, going from a 7 to a 9. That's significantly more durable in the bolt action rules. And that somewhat disparaging gap in points between the Opel and the Wirbelwind is definitely justified. Your enemy is absolutely going to want to neutralize that Flak and is likely going to dedicate every anti-armor unit in his list to take it out. So while it is an uphill battle for the Wirbelwind to justify its points investments, it's going to be able to stick around a little bit longer than the Opel would in order to accomplish that objective. However, it is worth noting that the Opel Flak truck does take up that tank slot in your standard reinforced platoon. So if you really do want that hardcore infantry counter in your tank slot, but can't afford the Wirbelwind, this is definitely a contender. And I think running that truck alongside something like a Puma and a Flak 88 could be a list that turns a lot of those traditional categories on their heads, but still gives you a well-rounded list. But if you are building a reinforced platoon and you do not plan on taking a tank but still find yourself with that awkward 50-point gap where you can't get an infantry units, you don't have any more support options that are useful, definitely consider taking that Opel Blitz in there. It's especially nice when you're playing very low point games like 500 points where you're really strapped on points. However, as far as the SdKfz vehicles go, you really don't want to be taking them in your tank slot of a reinforced platoon. And that's really why the Opel Blitz comes in so low at our number 5. Otherwise, I think it is a fantastic vehicle and great model to have in your collection. And that same philosophy is going to apply to our next vehicle at our number 4 slot, which is the Panzerwerfer 42. And much like the Opel Flak truck, this is going to be an artillery unit mounted on top of a mobile chassis, utilizing the tank slot in an armored platoon. But instead of having a light autocannon or a Flak this is going to be sporting the fan favorite and honestly, quite frankly, hilarious multiple launcher. And for those of you who aren't familiar with a multiple launcher, it is more or less a rocket system that acts as a heavy mortar, which is a 3-inch high explosive template that only hits on a 6. However, it not only has the chance to hit the target that you aimed it at, it also has the chance to hit every enemy unit within 6 inches of the initial template, meaning you can potentially dish out a lot of damage on bunched up enemies. It's a very powerful and also very fun unit to use in bolt action, as it feels like you're kind of rolling on a craps table to see if you blow up your enemy with artillery. And because multiple launchers only hit on a 6, regardless of hit modifiers, it's quite popular to run them as inexperienced. And that's exactly what we're going to do on my recommended build for the Panzerwerfer. So here you're going to have an inexperienced armored half-track with an armor value of 7, sporting a multiple launcher with 360-degree fire, all for just 96 points. Now, you can also upgrade this with a pintle-mounted medium machine gun, which I could see being useful, but not if you took this vehicle as inexperienced, seeing as you're going to get that -1 hit modifier every time you fire it. But if you are taking the vehicle as a regular, I would definitely recommend taking that pintle-mounted medium machine gun. And here, you're just getting a very durable platform for a multiple launcher. And believe me, when these things are not dealt with by your enemy, they will continuously dish out damage and punish your enemy every time he bunches up. This can prove especially deadly in objective-based games and dense urban maps where your enemy is going to want to fortify certain positions and make use of certain covered areas. I think 7 Plus Armored Carrier with no open top special rule is a fantastic way to field a multiple launcher. It's going to keep you alive and allow you to plink away at your enemies from the backfield with the long range of that artillery. And while it is unfortunate that this takes up the tank slot of a reinforced platoon, it means you can put another multiple launcher in your artillery slot and really double down on shelling out your enemy's army. I think it's a great unit, a very, very cool model, and is going to turn a lot of heads when it shows up on the battlefield. Now, honorable mention to the SdKfz, which is a Hanomag outfitted with these same rockets. However, you are going to be paying a little bit more points for that MMG that's automatically included on the Hanomag, and it is going to gain the open top special rule. And as I stated earlier, I think paying those points for that medium machine gun on an inexperienced unit isn't the best use of your points, and that open top rule is always a drawback. So I really do think the Panzerwerfer is just a better variant of the same tool. And while this multiple launcher might not be a hard anti-tank counter, the Panzerwerfer is not useless against enemy tanks, seeing as you are going to be hitting them on their top armor with indirect fire, on top of that HE penetration value of 3, meaning you are going to be hitting a lot of armor units with a pen value of +4. That's going to pin out even heavy tanks. And that only becomes more appealing when you take into consideration that high explosive rounds do not lose their penetration value at long range. Still, this thing is not going to duke it out against a platoon of Shermans, and I would definitely recommend Panzerfaust, Panzerschrecks, and perhaps something like a Flak 88 if you're not going for that second multiple launcher in your artillery slot. And on top of that, there's always the Puma in the armored car slot to support anything your tank slot comes up short of in the anti-tank role. But next we are on to our number 3 vehicle, and finally we are on to actual armored car and support vehicles that do not take up the tank slots. We have, at number 3, the SdKfz 233, also known as the 8-Rad Stummel. Now, Stummel is German for stump, and that is a nickname given to the 7.5 light howitzer, which was retrofitted onto a lot of support vehicles by the end of the Second World War. And the 8-Rad, or SdKfz 231, was one of the first vehicles to receive this howitzer support vehicle upgrade. So effectively, this is going to be the SdKfz 231 8-Rad armored car, but given the light howitzer upgrade for plus 20 points, thus changing the vehicle overall to an SdKfz 233, coming in at 120 points in the armored car slot of a reinforced platoon. And with those points, you are getting an armored car with an armor value of 7, sporting a light howitzer with a 2-inch high explosive profile, a forward arc medium machine gun, which is an upgrade from the coaxial, which is on the normal 231. You are no longer bound to firing one or the other. You can fire the howitzer and this upgraded medium machine gun. But you also have the open top special rule, dual direction steering, and recce. And that dual direction steering, combined with a recce rule, is going to come in a lot of handy for getting this vehicle out of trouble when it needs to. Combine that with the respectable fire output of a light howitzer and a medium machine gun with a buzzsaw keyword, and you're going to have a very nimble vehicle that can zip around the battlefield and provide lethal anti-infantry support where needed. And that's really exactly what you want in this armored car slot of your reinforced platoon. It's not going to be the hammer that comes down on your enemy, but rather a scalpel that's going to come in where and when it is needed the most, and provide that little extra nudge to tip the battlefield in your favor. Now, I will say just because this unit has recce and dual direction steering does not mean that it is invulnerable. You will be tempted to use that 24-inch movement range to its max efficiency, and you will be tempted to get this thing into more trouble than it should. Just keep in mind, you have very long-range weapons, and you do not need to be in close range to use them. Feel free to park this guy back 30 inches away from your enemy's front line, and cover your infantry while they advance on them. Overall, I think this vehicle has a lot of utility, and a good commander will use it to continuously harass and dislodge enemy positions. Honorable mention to the SdKfz 234-3 variant of this vehicle. It's more or less the same vehicle, it's just built on the Puma chassis rather than the original 8-Rad chassis, and basically with this variant you are paying 5 extra points to turn that forward arc MMG into a pintle-mounted one with the Flak special rule. So if you know you're going to be encountering some forward air observers, maybe consider that 5-point upgrade. To me, I consider it to be highly unnecessary. And I think overall it's going to come down to which vehicle you'd rather have in your collection, be it the initial 8-rad chassis or the late war Puma chassis. But with that vehicle finished, we're going to move along to our number 2 vehicle, which is going to be the SdKfz 222. And this is an armored car that saw a lot of use in World War II, serving from the interwar period all the way up to 1944. And I'll be honest, I'm sure some of them were used into 1945, if not for support and command roles alone. And at 95 points, you're going to get something very akin to the British Humber Mark II. That is going to be a 95-point armored car with an armor value of 7, sporting a light autocannon and coaxial MMG in the turrets, and the Recce special rule. The main difference being that you also get the open-topped special rule, but simultaneously gain the Flak special rule. So you are going to sacrifice a little bit of durability for the ability to counter air observers. And while I think the Humber does kind of get the better end of the stick here, not having that weak open-topped special rule, the Flak ability does come up from time to time, and I think the 222 is a fantastic unit overall. It is a fantastic, highly mobile platform for that light autocannon, and takes up the armored car slot, which gives it a massive leg up on that Opel Blitz flak truck with the armored cab. And much like the 233, I think this is going to be a fantastic support unit that's going to be able to get a lot of utility around the battlefield. Again, one shot from that 1-inch HE template of the autocannon isn't that impressive, but you are going to have 2 shots each time you fire this weapon, and over a span of 5 or 6 rounds, damage really will start to pile up on your enemy. As I always say, I think autocannons are a great light ordnance weapon that really helps mitigate the shortcoming of most vehicles by allowing you to put out a lot of shots to help mitigate those hit modifiers. And while I would say a light howitzer and a medium machine gun might be a little bit more powerful than just one light autocannon, the 222 is 25 points cheaper. And there's definitely something to be said about having 2 of your shots be high explosive versus having only one of them be high explosive while the others are small arms fire. There's definitely a push and pull between the 222 and the 233, but overall, because of the lower point cost, I think the 222 is just going to fit into more lists and play that support role very well. And here I'm going to throw out an honorable mention to the SdKfz 231, which is the standard 8-rad prior to the 233 upgrade. And this vehicle is going to support identical stats to the 222, however it is going to lose that flak and the open top special rule, and gain dual direction steering for plus 5 points. And that's really going to increase the durability of this vehicle by negating that open top keyword and then allowing your Recce to move you at full speed backwards. But overall, still not necessary in my book, and I think again it's going to come down to which model you'd prefer to have in your army, the 222 armored car or the 8-rad. And I will also make note that the 222 is about half the size of the 8-rad model, which will give it some survivability outside of the bolt action rules. But overall, I really love the design of the 222. I have a few Tamiya 148 ones myself. They are very cool vehicles, and I think every German player should have one in their collection. But with the 222 wrapped up, we are now moving on to our number 1 SdKfz vehicle. And to no one's surprise, it is going to be the SdKfz 234, also known as the Puma. Now, just from the amount of times I've mentioned this vehicle in other faction and unit reviews, should give you a hint as to why this vehicle is so popular. At 160 points, you are getting a heavy armored car with an armor value of 8, sporting a medium anti-tank gun with a penetration value of plus 5, a coaxial medium machine gun, all of which is accompanied by the Recce special rule, supported by dual direction steering. Now compare this to the Chaffee, which we just reviewed in our US and Lend-Lease top 10 vehicles, and you're going to see this similar profile where we have a pretty powerful medium anti-tank gun strapped onto a very nimble and light chassis that's going to be able to duel enemy tanks and stay alive by ducking them with the Recce special rule. However, things get better here when you consider that the Puma is also a wheeled vehicle with dual direction steering. That means you're going to be able to make a run order at 24 inches while still executing a turn, or an advance order at 12 inches while executing 2 turns. And that can be, again, in full reverse. So there's almost no way you can whiff your positioning for Recce with the Puma. It's going to get out of harm's way if it needs to, as long as you have some piece of terrain on your board. That high mobility is also going to increase its presence as a threat against enemy vehicles, as it's really going to be able to get around there and flank those Shermans and hit their weak side armor, something that a medium anti-tank gun is going to have no problem punching through. So overall, the Puma is comparable to the Chaffee, yes, but it is also an armored car that does not take up the tank slot of a platoon. This means the Puma is going to leave a lot of open doors for list building when you want to fill out that tank slot. You're no longer forced into equipping that tank slot with an armored fighting vehicle and can branch out into other things, such as the Panzerwerfer mentioned earlier in this video, or the Grille artillery piece as mentioned in my top 10 Panzer video. So a unit like the Puma and other things like the Flak 88 in the German arsenal is going to open a lot of doors and give them a lot of flexible list building options that other nations just aren't going to have access to. And that's why the Puma ranks in at number 1 for me. It's overall a very, very cool vehicle, not just thematically, but also it has probably the best combination of bolt-action vehicle rules bundled into one. So there you have my top 5 Sonderkraftfahrzeuge as they appear in bolt action. At number 5 we have the Opel Blitz flak truck, sporting a variety of options that allows us to bring autocannons onto the field without having to invest in a tow or suffer the consequences of being stationary and manned by infantry. After that we have the Panzerwerfer 42, which is another artillery piece mounted on an armored carrier chassis, but one that's going to be able to be taken as inexperienced for under 100 points and lay down artillery fire on your enemy from across the battlefields. However, this and the Opel flak truck are both going to take up that tank slot in a reinforced platoon, which makes them rank a little bit lower on the list. But at number 3 on the list, we are going to have the SdKfz 233 8-rad Stummel, which is going to be rocking a light howitzer on an armored chassis and serve as a pretty hardcore anti-infantry support vehicle. However, it does lean a little bit on the expensive side for a 7+ carrier, and I've opted to put the 222 at number 2 in front of it. And this thing is more or less your ideal autocannon platform on a nimble 7+ chassis, which can maneuver around the battlefield and provide support where needed. And at number 1 we have the legendary Puma, which is just a great vehicle profile, highly mobile with recce, dual direction steering, and that wheeled vehicle movement, while sporting a respectable 8+ armor and a medium anti-tank gun. It's just all around a great vehicle that's going to put a lot of pressure on your enemy's armor and punish them for not reacting accordingly. And as a German player, I highly recommend owning the Puma and the SdKfz 222, or perhaps the 8-rad 231 or 233 if you wish. Having the Puma in one of those infantry support oriented vehicles is going to give you a lot of flexibility with your list building, as you can put different support units in that armored car and tank slot of the reinforced platoon. A lot of factions in bolt action are forced into having a 7+ armored machine gun carrier in that armored car slot and a medium tank with a medium anti-tank gun in that tank slot, and the Germans just don't have to abide to that strict build. It's really great and makes them one of the funner factions to play in bolt action. But as a side note, I do want to mention that the British do have very similar vehicles that give them a lot of flexibility in their list building too. And if you want to see more of that, go check out my top 10 British vehicle review. But I want to know what you guys think. Do you agree with my top 5 vehicles here? Do you think there's an SdKfz variant that I might have left out? Please keep in mind that anything that is a Panzerkampfwagen or based on a Panzerkampfwagen hull, such as the Hummel or the Grille, is considered for the sake of these videos as a Panzer and not included here. And we're also not including units from the theater and campaign books. Otherwise, there would be some very crazy half-track variants that showed up in the Western Desert on this list. But we'll save that for another day. I want to know what you guys think below. Have you used any of these vehicles? Do you like some of them more than the others? Do you love to hate on the Puma? How do you feel about recce? It shows up in every one of these videos. I think it's a kind of overpowered broken rule, but one that is going to show up a lot as it stands now. As always, be kind in the comments section, leave reasoning behind any points you want to make, and until next time, take care.